Hello everyone, bringing you a video today which forms the Mannequin of the Month video for August 2020, and as is usual the topic for this has been picked through a poll over on Patreon. The corporal tier over there get to vote on a poll choosing the topic we're going to cover each month. And the topic chosen this month, of course, is a private in the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment in Korea in 1953. A topic I'm very pleased with. It gives some opportunities to talk about some unusual features of the web equipment. And also it's more Korean War content for the channel, which is good. You know, the anniversary's just been at the start of the war. It's quite an interesting part of the Cold War in wider thinking. And it's a topic that I very much enjoy talking about. The 3rd Battalion of Royal Australian Regiment by 1953, of course, is part of the British Commonwealth Division. And as we'll see as we look at this in more detail, a lot of the uniform and equipment here actually is of British origin because of that. It was somewhat standard in the division. The men were provided with British clothing and so forth. The 3rd Battalion Royal Australian Regiment had been was Australia's primary army commitment to the war, that is to say land forces. And as I say, we'll talk about the details of this now, the uniform, and we'll start at the top as we normally do and work our way down. Perhaps the most visually distinctive piece of the uniform, which is usually immediately identifiable as Australian, is the slouch hat. The one we have here is a relatively modern example, but it's nevertheless correct in representing a pattern of hat that was in use at the time. There were multiple, you see them with press studs holding up the brim, hooks and loops. There are various different patterns in use. This is an example with a hook and a loop. And as I say, it's a relatively modern example, but it serves an illustrative purpose here on the mannequin. And we'll have a look at this in more detail as we move it around, when we can see the badge on the upturned brim and so forth. Moving slightly further down, we have the collar here. You can actually see the shirt underneath the combat smock. This is a British issue wool shirt, obviously issued to Australians as well at this point, and it's made of wool. It's part of the cold weather clothing. It's a new pattern introduced as part of the cold weather clothing for Korea, superseding the slightly earlier variants which had been used in the immediate post-war years. The combat smock itself is of course part of the combat uniform introduced as part of the larger combat cold weather clothing for use in Korea. And this, as I say, is the smock from that uniform. See breast pockets, buttons, big heavy duty metal zip at the top there. We have talked about this in more detail in previous videos, so as I say, I'll leave that there. The combat smock from the Korean War era combat uniform. This is a sateen example, so the slightly later example, not made of gabardine, made of sateen. So this is the most up-to-date British Army uniform, also in use by this time in Korea. We have the most up-to-date British Army web equipment, something of a theatre issue for the Far East, also issued out to some other troops as well more generally, but generally speaking, a theatre issue for the Far East. It was also in use in Malaya. 1944 pattern web equipment, of course, designed during the Second World War for the ongoing war in the Far East, never actually issued never issued and then used in combat during the Second World War. There were troops en route who were issued this, but they never saw combat in theatre before the end of the war wearing this equipment, but used extensively post-war. Similar to the 1937 pattern, it is an advance on that design. You can see as looking at the top and working down as we usually do. See the L straps here, which support the haversack on the back. These hook into the top of the pouches in a similar way to the 1937 pattern equipment. The pouches are enlarged from the 1937 pattern to give them a greater carrying capacity. And you can also, looking back to the L straps, you can actually adjust these, which was not a feature seen on the 1937 pattern. Quick release tabs on the pouches, of course. And we have the belt here in 3 parts, which we'll see as we move this round, with the 1919 patent buckle there, you can see, in aluminium, subdued aluminium. An unusual feature which is not usually seen in use but seems to be fairly common with men of 3 RAR is the strap coming round from the haversack which buckles around the chest. So this attaches to the haversack at the rear, comes round under each arm and buckles with a simple buckle at the front here. The intended purpose of this, of course, is not only to secure and stabilise the haversack on the back. There are in fact loops on the back of the pouches through which this is supposed to be threaded, and it stops the pouches sagging away from the body. They do sit quite high on the belt and they can carry quite a heavy load of ammunition, and it stops any sagging away from the body. That said, this strap is rarely used, and even in this instance it's not being used in the correct manner, shall we say, but still serves its purpose very well. It's just been looped up over the top of the pouches, not making use of the loops on the back, just simply looped over where the buckles attach at the back there. And as I say, this is taken directly from photographs of 3 RAR in Korea in 1953. This seems to have been a fairly common way of doing things, so I thought it would be interesting to illustrate here. Looking at the left hand side of the mannequin here, we can see on the upturned brim of the slouch hat here we have the Rising Sun badge. We'll take a look at this in close up now. The particular Rising Sun cap badge we have here is a pre-1949 example, which still bears the word Commonwealth in a scroll at the bottom. This has been changed in 1949 to remove the word Commonwealth, but this pattern would still have been issued at the time. When insignia is changed, it often takes a little while for the change to actually take place, and this is also exemplified by the Imperial State Crown we can see here. It's very common to see amongst the majority of Commonwealth forces that at the end of the Korean War, men are still wearing cap badges with the Imperial State Crown, although with Queen Elizabeth II coming to the throne, an official change had been made to the St Edward's Crown. Underneath the Slouch Hat, you can see here the hood is attached to the combat smock. This buttons on around the back of the collar using the epaulette buttons and a third button at the back of the collar. And this is quite commonly seen with men of 3 RAR in 1953, quite commonly seen attached to the smock. Moving down, we can see more details of the combat uniform. We can see the large reinforcing piece that reinforces the sleeve around the elbow there, and obviously a single button simple cuff there, as you can see. If we lift this out of the way, underneath we can see features of the 1944 pattern web equipment here. We can see this is in fact a 3-part belt. If I move the frog back, you can see where the front section here clips on, and that's mirrored on the other side. And also you can see this is in fact supported at 6 points. The straps buckle onto the pouches at the front. There's a strap here, and then it buckles onto the back of the belt as well. So there's 3 attachment points on each side for a total of 6. The frog here is another unusual feature. We talked about the chest strap as a feature that's not normally seen in use, or not particularly commonly seen in use. Similar thing with the frog here. Now this of course can be used if just the belt were being worn for drill, to carry a bayonet, but usually the pouches are used to carry a bayonet. If you have a spike bayonet or something similar, or a short bayonet, it can be carried in the loops on the side of the pouch here. Australians of course still using the rifle number 1 Mark III Star, therefore have the long sword bayonet, which cannot be carried here. When the web equipment was introduced, of course, large numbers of British troops, who it was originally intended for, were still using the rifle number 1 Mark III out in the Far East, and so both the Indian bayonet, which is shorter but not short enough to fit in here, and the standard sword bayonet required a separate frog in order for them to be carried. They cannot be carried on the side of the pouch, and it's a nice illustration of that particular feature of the design here. You can see the bayonet frog there, and as I say, the standard sword bayonet for the rifle number 1 Mark III Star. We can also just see at the back here, we'll have a look at this in more detail as we move it round, the haversack here, nice view of the side pouch there with a quick release fastener and so forth, holding a mess tin half in this instance, and underneath we have the 1944 pattern, well, the poncho from the set of equipment carried underneath the haversack there. But we'll move this around now and have a look at the back. Looking at the back of the equipment here, you can see the hood poking out from underneath the hat there, just on top of the haversack. The haversack itself is a great advance on that which was issued with the 1937 pattern web equipment. We have 2 side pouches, 1 on each side. We have easy pull down straps on the flap, extra fittings here, more loops as we had on the belt. You saw those previously, the eyelets for M1910 style hanger hooks, which we'll get to in just a moment. Loop on the back there to carry an entrenching tool or lightweight pick and shovel. And then underneath, of course, we have the straps which allow you to attach a poncho and various other items underneath the haversack there. So a good advance on the 1937 pattern in that regard. You can see the tails of the braces coming down here. As I say, the belt supported at the back with the 2 straps coming down on the braces. And then we have here on the right hip the water bottle in its carrier with a cup nested beneath, very similar to the American M1910, and this is supported by M1910 style hanger hooks. The eyelets were also intended for if US equipment such as US machetes and things were issued with the equipment, they could be carried easily, and there is some interchangeability was intended as part of the design there. We'll move this round now and have a look at the right hand side. Looking at the right hand side here, we can see a little bit better view of the bottle with the aluminium cap and so forth there, obviously a first issue bottle, and nothing much more to talk about on the side of the smock and so forth here on the right hand side. It's there's not a huge amount more detail to talk about than we saw on the left, but one caveat I will say, these wings would not be accurate for this recreation. Badges very rarely worn on combat uniform at this time. In fact, brassards were provided for that purpose, but as I say, this is original to the smock, so I've not wanted to remove it, but please imagine that's not there because that's not actually an accurate part of this recreation. But obviously don't want to remove them. The smock came with them attached. There's one piece of interesting feature on the webbing I'll just talk about. If I lift the sleeve out of the way here, we can see on the belt there is in fact a loop. I've mentioned this previously. This being intended originally, if you were carrying the rifle on the sling, this would secure the small of the stock so that the rifle would be stabilised. Very rarely used. Later on, these would be basically quite commonly removed because they're not much use for their intended purpose really. You can see further adjustment on the L straps here, on the side straps as well. That's one feature I will mention here. Strap coming round and a buckle there, just pull to tighten. So it can be adjusted when worn. Again, another advance on the 1937 pattern web equipment. So there we are, that's a look at the web equipment and so forth. As I say, worn pretty much as per the fitting instructions, with the small modification of wearing the strap over the top of the pouches rather than through the loops behind them, and the inclusion of the bayonet frog round on the left hand side as well. So there we are, that's the Mannequin of the Month for August 2020. I do hope you found that interesting, as I always say. If you have, and you'd like to see more from the channel, then please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell down below, the little notification button. That of course will alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. There's both a Patreon and a PayPal link down below. And as already said, Patreon supporters in the corporal tier get to vote each month on what we're going to cover in Mannequin of the Month. So that might entice some of you to go and have a look over there. There's also social media for the channel where there will be photographs of this posted up as well. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, all linked down below. And there's also an email address should you wish to get in touch with me but you don't really use social media. But that's everything I wanted to cover in this video. So until next time, bye for now.